We're now in chapter 2, part 6 of Romano Guardini's book, The Lord, and we're looking at the chapter known as the Transfigured Body. Chapter 2, part 6. He says, when we read the Gospel's account of Easter and the weeks immediately following it attentively, he says, we notice the dual character of Christ portrayed. So the first thing he's going to do here in this chapter is emphasize a dual character, but he's fitting the two sides of the character together. And what is this? Well, it's first of all the difference between the risen Christ and Jesus before his death. Indeed, between the risen Christ and all men, the difference between them is carefully stressed. His presence, says Guardini, is strange. His coming shocks and terrifies. Actually, he no longer comes and goes, but appears and vanishes with disturbing suddenness. Corporal limitations no longer hamper him. The barriers of time and space have ceased to exist. He moves with a freedom impossible on earth. Yet, the evangelists stress equally the fact that this is the same Jesus of Nazareth. Not a mere spirit, but the corporeal Lord who had lived among them. And he points out the very first words about the resurrection: the stone rolled away from the entrance of the sepulchre, and the carefully folded burial cloths suggest substance. Okay? That's how Guardini says it. End of parentheses. Then we read how the disciples see him, feel his proximity, hear him, experience his body's compactness. Actually, in the case of St. Thomas, touching the wounds, which from the nails and placing their hands in the gash in his side. The whole incident of St. Thomas, who at first does not believe, only then, overwhelmed to fling himself at the feet of the Lord, lets us share in the tremendous mystery of Christ's corporeality, his bodiliness. That word corporality isn't used very much now, but it means, the body's real, tangible. And the same intention leads, says Guardini, to the description of his startling appearance in the room where the disciples are dining. They stare at him as a ghost until he quiets them by asking for something to eat, and eats right in front of them, before their eyes. Again, on the lake, John sees a form on the beach. It is the Lord, right? So there's that quality. And Peter leaps overboard and swims to him, while the others follow in the boat. Nearing the shore, they see a fire burning and fish on the coals, and Christ divides the fish and partakes of it with them. Such things and more are reported of Christ's corporal reality, his bodily reality, his bodiliness. Okay? That's it. Among them, the memorable opening of St. John's first epistle. This is a very, very stunning opening of this epistle. He says, I write of what was from the beginning, what we have heard, what we have seen with our own eyes, what we have looked upon, and our own hands have handled of the word of life. And the life was made known, and we have seen, and now testify and announce to you the life eternal, which was with the Father and has appeared to us. What we have seen and have heard we announce to you, in order that you may also have fellowship with us. Again and again it is stressed, says Guardini, here is something far out of the ordinary. The Lord is transformed. His life is different from what it was. His existence incomprehensible. It has a new power that comes straight from the divine, to which it constantly returns for replenishment. It's quite an image of a power that's always going back to God for immediate replenishment. Isn't that something? See? Yet, even though it's going back to God for replenishment, Guardini emphasizes, yet it is corporal. The whole Jesus is contained in it. His essence and his character, okay? More, his earthly life, passion, and death are incorporated into this. So it's, and Guardini emphasizes, more his earthly life, his passion and death are incorporated into it as the wounds show. See? Nothing is sloughed off. Nothing left behind as unessential. Okay? That, I think, is really crucial to think about the resurrection. Nothing left behind as unessential. Everything is tangible, though transformed reality, the reality of which we were given a premonition on the last journey to Jerusalem, the mysterious lightning-like flash of the Transfiguration. This was no mere subjective experience of the disciples, but an independent reality. It was not pure spirituality, no pure spirituality, but the saturation, transformation by the Holy Spirit of Christ's whole life, okay? Body included. Indeed, only in the transformed existence does the body fully come into its own. For the human body is different from the animals, okay? And is only then fulfilled when it no longer can be confused with the animal body, okay? And Guardini underlines this in the next line. The resurrection and transfiguration are necessary to the full understanding of what the human body really is, okay? If we continue to read thoughtfully and reverently, we notice something else. Of all the apostles who stresses the corporal reality of the resurrected Christ, he who most stressed the divinity of Jesus, John. He who proclaimed Christ as the Logos, the eternal Son, also traced the living features of his resurrected body. There were reasons for this, and the key reason that Guardini highlights is the problem of Gnosticism. You see, John's Gospel, when it was written, Christianity's message had spread so far that the movement had come for a clarification of the Christian essence. And in addition, John had certain polemic reasons for his clear-cut statement. His writings had to face a powerful enemy, the pagan and half-Christian spiritualism of the Gnostics, who were convinced that God was spirit. However, their conviction was so narrow, their idea of that was so narrow and distorted that they concluded that he was therefore anti-body, anti-corporeal, and that in his eyes all matter was impure. Okay? Consequently, they could not accept the incarnation, insisting instead that a divine being, the eternal Logos, had descended from heaven and made his dwelling in the man Jesus. Through his mouth we were taught the truth and shown the way from the fleshly to the spiritual. When the man Jesus died, the Logos left him and returned to heaven. To this, St. John says, and Guardini brilliantly summarizes it in one part of a sentence. St. John says, God became man and remains man in all eternity. Okay, God became man and remains man in all eternity. To the question, what have we to do with the spiritualism of Gnostics? The answer is, unfortunately, I add, a great deal. Guardini warns us here. Modernity, and may I add, postmodernity, is often completely confused by what Guardini refers to as spiritualism. In the preceding chapter, we saw how it is constantly trying to explain away the resurrection. You'll see that in our chapter on the resurrection. They try to explain it away. For example, Jesus' divinity, they treat it as mere religious experience. The figure of the resurrected Christ as the product of communal piety in order to separate the real Jesus from the Christ of faith. Whether expressed historically, says Guardini, or psychologically, as it is today. So some earlier on, they were talking about this problem and treating it as historical problem. Now, he says it's treated more as a psychological issue. Or it's treated as mythologically, as it was at the time of the Gnostics. So the Gnostics made up myths. Modern people either rely on a kind of false understanding of history, and remember, that gets back to the theme of Guardini as he's trying to clarify history, right? Or psychology, okay? And the argument, he says, remains the same. In reply, John erected two monumental landmarks. So he set out two very important insights, landmarks, words. And the first is in the sentence, and the Word was made flesh. John 1:14. Not entered into a human being, but became that being, so that he was simultaneously human and divine. His deed, God's deed, his fate, God's fate, resulting in an indivisible unity of existence, responsibility, and dignity. So the whole thing, okay? Not merely in the Word was made man, but that there be no possible mistake, the Word was made flesh. The clarity is almost unbearable, says Guardini. Right. The second landmark is John's proclamation. This is now the third time that Jesus appeared to the disciples after he had risen from the dead. Not merely in the memory of his followers, not merely made manifest through the power of his teaching and his works, but in divine and human, spiritual and corporal reality, transformed, transfigured. God's Son did not discard his humanity, but took it with him into the eternal glory revealed in the book of Revelation. and also in the dying vision of Saint Stephen, and referred to by Saint Paul when he speaks of the risen Christ sitting at the right hand of God. So Stephen sees that. Paul emphasizes it. He's a human being there, and he's there at the right hand of God. So, and it's not like he becomes a ghost after he dies. And this is what Guardini says. Who is God? Okay? And he gives a lot of qualifications to who God is that we're familiar with. He is endless, omnipotent, eternal, all-inclusive, one with a capital O, in the simplicity of his pure reality, the unchanging one with capital U and capital O. He's living in himself, sufficient unto himself. And then Guardini brings up the problem. What possible use could he have for a human body in heaven? The incarnation is already incomprehensible enough, says Guardini, if we accept it as an act of unfathomable love. This life and death, isn't that enough? Isn't that sufficient? Why must we also believe that this piece of creation is assimilated into the eternity of God's existence? What for? A bit of earthliness lost and caught up into the tremendousness of eternity? Why doesn't the Logos shake the dust from him and return to the pure clarity of its free divinity? But Revelation defines such ideas as philosophy or worldly religion, to which Christian thought is by nature and definition diametrically opposed. Okay? So Guardini wants to emphasize that you can't just wave a wand around the life of Jesus after he dies and have his body disappear. That's what he's getting at. And that's very, very important. Why? Because because you get confused then about the dignity of the body. I think that's a big consequence of that. Okay? What then, he says, he asks this question, what manner of God is this, with whom resurrection, ascension, and throning on his right hand are possible? Guardini answers, precisely the kind of God who makes such things possible. He is the God of resurrection, Guardini says, and we must learn that it's not the resurrection that's irreconcilable to him, but part of our thinking that is irreconcilable to the resurrection, because we tend to falsify things. And the way we falsify it is denying the bodily reality of the resurrection. He goes on, if we take Christ's figure as our point of departure, trying to understand from there, we find ourselves faced with the choice between a completely new conception of God and our relation to him, and utter rejection of everything that surpasses the limitations of a great man. We must also completely reform our idea of humanity. See, what happens when you change your view about the resurrection is you experiencing a reform of our notion of humanity, Guardini says. If it is to fit the mold Christ has indicated, we can no longer say that man is as the world supposes him to be. In other words, the resurrection removes the limitations of our earthly judgment. right? Therefore, it is impossible that he throne at God's right. See, there are people who really believe that Jesus isn't at God's right hand. He's not on the throne. Okay? And we have to deal with that. But Revelation takes us in a different direction. Revelation has revealed that the Son of Man is at the throne right now. Okay? Man must be other than the world supposes him. See, when you live out of the power of the resurrection, you can see more to our humanity than meets the eye. And that's really important because there's a lot of people that want to dehumanize people. The resurrection pushes that dehumanization in a different direction. It humanizes. See? That's the point. Guardini goes on. We must learn that God is not only supreme being, but supremely divine and human being. We must realize that man is not only human, but that the tip of his essence reaches into the unknown and receives its fulfillment in his resurrection. It is the resurrection that brings ultimately clarity to that which is known as salvation. You can see that. Not only does it reveal who God is, who we are, what sin really means, not only does it indicate the way to new accomplishment for the children of God, we cannot even say that it only propitiates sin, anchoring the superabundance of divine pardon and justice and love. It does that, but something greater, more vital in the concrete sense of the word. Resurrection consists of the transformation of the totality of our being. The totality, all things fit together, spirit and flesh, by the recreative power of God's love. Living reality, Guardini says, not only idea, attitude, or orientation, it is the second divine beginning, comparable only to the first, the tremendous act of creation. To the question, what is salvation? What does it mean to save, to have saved, to be saved? No full answer can be given without the words, the resurrected Christ. Isn't that something? Isn't that something? So what we have to learn is that this carries us right to the meaning of the depths of the Eucharist, of the sacrament, says Guardini. It's a divine, concrete reality. We're celebrating the resurrection when we celebrate the Eucharist. He says, now we begin to understand what sacrament means. Were we not also among those in Capernaum who protested, how can this man give us his flesh to eat? Why the strange words about flesh and blood of Christ? Why not just the truth and the love of Jesus? Why not leave it at the first half of the promise in John 6? Are the tangible, if not material details, the eating of flesh and drinking of blood, really necessary? Guardini asks. Wouldn't remembrance of the Lord and all the purity and dignity of his Spirit suffice? And he asks the question, why not? Because not only the Spirit of Christ, but his resurrected flesh and blood, his whole transfigured humanity is redemption. Because through the Holy Eucharist, we participate again and again in this transfigured reality at once human and divine. Because communion in his flesh and blood is the remedy of immortality, that's a quote from the Fathers, the pharmakon athanaseus, as the Greek fathers called it, of an immortality not only spiritual, but also bodily, corporal, a man caught up in the abundance of pure corporal and pure spiritual life in God. Thank you very much.